The air in the underground base never changed. It was always cold, smelling of metal, old coffee, and a kind of tired fear. The woman, known to the others only as the linguist, sat in her small room, staring at the symbols on her screen. They swirled and pulsed, a soft blue light against the dark. To everyone else in the Blacksite, it was just noise. To her, it was a song, but one where she could only hear every other note. She had been brought here in the middle of the night, a bag over her head, hands cuffed. They hadn't asked. They had told. She was the best, they said, the only one who might crack the code from the object. That's what they called it. The object. A piece of smooth, dark stone that hummed and gave off light, found in a place no map would ever show. The commander ran the Blacksite. He was a man built from straight lines and hard decisions. He didn't have time for songs or stories. When he looked at the object, he didn't see a message. He saw a weapon, a key, a thing to be taken apart and used. Their first meeting set the tone for everything that came after. He stood over her in the main lab, his shadow covering her screen. "Report," he said. It wasn't a request. She took a breath, trying to find simple words for a feeling that wasn't simple. "Sir, the patterns. They aren't mathematical, not like a machine language. They're more emotional, layered. I think it's a narrative. A record of some kind." He let out a short, sharp sound that wasn't a laugh. "A storybook? I didn't bring you here to find a fairy tale. Is it a schematic? A set of coordinates? A weakness?" "It's not that direct," she tried to explain, her voice quiet but firm. "Understanding the story might be the key to everything else." He leaned down, his face close to hers. She could see the cold light of the screens reflected in his eyes. "Let me make this clear. My team is trying to figure out how to turn that thing's energy into a shield. Another team is trying to see if it can guide a missile. We are here for practical, earthly results. You are here to give me data. Not feelings. Not stories. Data." He walked away, his boots making a loud, final sound on the floor. The soldiers and engineers in the room didn't look at her. They had gotten the message. She was not part of the real work. She was a desk sweeper, as one of the soldiers later muttered where she could hear. The days bled into weeks. The linguist worked in a bubble of silence. People talked around her, not to her. In the cafeteria, conversations died when she sat down with her tray. The commander's right-hand man, a sergeant with knuckles that looked like they were made of stone, was the worst. He would walk past her station and make a comment about the ghost hunter finding any friendly spirits today. His small team would smile, a mean, tight little smile. The linguist absorbed it all. She didn't fight back. She just worked. While the others tried to force the object to react, to give up power, she listened. She noticed things. The symbols changed slightly when the base's generator surged. They reacted to loud noises by shifting into a tighter, defensive pattern. One day, a young engineer, stressed and tired, shouted in frustration and slammed his hand on a console. On her screen, the linguist saw the symbols flare a sudden, hot red before fading. It was a flinch. The object was aware. She tried to bring this to the commander. It was a mistake. He was in the middle of a strategy session with his weapons team when she approached. "Sir, I have an observation. The artifact, the object, it shows signs of reactive awareness. It's not inert. Our methods might be damaging the—" He cut her off, turning slowly to face the room. "Did everyone hear that?" he asked, his voice loud. "The doctor here believes our guest has feelings, that we might be hurting its feelings." A low chuckle went through the team. "Perhaps we should offer it some tea and ask it nicely to show us how to split an atom." The laughter was louder this time. Her face grew warm, but she kept her eyes on his. "I'm saying our approach might be counterproductive. We're yelling at it in a language it doesn't understand. And you think whispering will work better?" He countered, stepping closer. "This is not a university library. This is the edge. We push, we test limits. We break things to see how they work. That is the only language that matters here. Your job is to translate the bits we break off. Nothing more." He turned his back, a clear dismissal. The sergeant gave her a look that said, "You never learn." That night, alone in her bunk, the weight of the place pressed down on her. The ridicule was a tool, she realized. It was meant to keep her small, to keep her in her assigned box. The commander didn't just dislike her ideas. He was afraid of them. Because if the object was more than a tool, then his whole way of thinking loud, hard, and forceful was wrong. She looked at the tiny, secure tablet they had given her. It could only access the object's data stream in an internal note system. No outside world. Just the hum of the strange rock and the echo of the commander's contempt. But in that isolation, a new thought came. The object's language was about connection, about layers of meaning stacked on top of each other. What if she wasn't just learning to read it? What if, slowly, without even knowing it, she was learning to think like it? She sat up, the blanket falling away. The commander saw a puzzle to be smashed open. She was starting to see a window. And if it was a window, then maybe, just maybe, she could see through it to the other side. And what she might see could change everything. But for now, she was just the quiet woman in the corner, the one everyone laughed at. And that, she decided, might be the only thing keeping her safe. The pressure in the Blacksite changed. It wasn't just the cold air or the constant hum of machines anymore. Now there was a sharp edge of excitement, a nervous energy that crackled through the halls. The commander had decided it was time to push. No more listening. No more studying. It was time to make the object talk. The linguist felt it the moment she walked into the main lab. People moved faster, spoke in short, clipped codes. A large, heavy piece of machinery, all polished steel and snaking cables, had been wheeled next to the pedestal holding the object. It looked like a dental chair for a god. This was the direct interface array, the sergeant explained loudly to a group of technicians, his chest puffed out. It would send a focused energy pulse right into the heart of the artifact. "We'll give it a jump start," he said, grinning. A deep, cold worry settled in the linguist's stomach. She spent her morning watching the symbols on her screen. They were calm, flowing in their usual gentle waves. But as the technicians powered up the array, she saw a shift. The symbols began to pulse, not with light, but with a slower, rhythmic beat. Like a heartbeat quickening, she couldn't stay silent. She found the commander on the command platform, looking over the lab like a general surveying a battlefield. "Sir," she said, keeping her voice low, "the artifact's pattern is changing. It's reacting to the power buildup. It reads as anticipatory, but also defensive. This could be dangerous." The commander didn't even look at her. He kept his eyes on the array. "Everything new is dangerous, Doctor. That's the point. Your job is to watch your screen and tell me what it says after we turn it on. Not before. The data suggests a high probability of a nonlinear energy discharge if we force a connection this way," she pressed, using the coldest, hardest technical terms she could, hoping it would get through. "We could destabilize its core matrix." Finally, he turned. His expression was one of pure, tired annoyance. "Your data is a guess. A story. My engineers have hard numbers, and they say we have a 70% chance of a clean handshake. I like those odds. Now return to your station." "That's an order." The laughter from the first meeting was gone. Now there was just dismissal. She was a fly to be swatted away from the important work. She walked back to her desk, her shoulders tight. The other scientists and soldiers avoided her gaze. She had spoken against the plan, and in this place, that made her an outsider twice over, the test began. A low whine filled the room, climbing in pitch. The lights dimmed, drawing power to the array. On her screen, the linguist watched the object's peaceful symbols shatter. The flowing waves turned into sharp, jagged lines. The soft blue light from the artifact itself began to stutter, flashing a sickly yellow. It was screaming in its own language, and she was the only one who could see it. Energy levels reaching threshold, a technician called out. Initiate pulse in 3, 2, 1. The commander leaned forward, a hungry look on his face. A bolt of visible energy, white and crackling, shot from the array and struck the object. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the room exploded in light and sound, not an explosion of fire, but of wrongness. The object flashed a blinding, painful red. A wave of force, silent but powerful, slammed outwards. It didn't break glass. It made the air itself feel thick and heavy, like moving through water. Every screen in the lab flickered and died. The array sparked, and a console erupted in a shower of sparks and smoke. Alarms screamed. People shouted, diving for cover. The linguist was thrown back in her chair, her head ringing. When the emergency lights flickered on, bathing the room in an ugly red glow, the scene was chaos. 2 engineers who had been closest to the array were on the ground, not moving. Others were clutching their heads, moaning. The smell of burnt wiring and something sweet, like ozone, choked the air. The commander stood frozen on the platform, his face pale in the red light. He was staring at the object, which was now dark and silent. A dead piece of stone? Then his gaze swept the room, past his injured men, past the smoking equipment, and landed on the linguist. She was pulling herself up, her eyes going from her dead screen to the wounded men. In that moment, their eyes met Dottie's shock and fear twisted into something else. Something hard and ugly. He couldn't blame the machine. He couldn't blame his own plan. He needed a reason, a person. He pointed a finger at her, his voice cutting through the alarm. You! This is on you. Your confused data, your warnings. You muddied the process. The accusation hung in the smoky air. Everyone turned to look at her. The sergeant, helping a dazed technician to his feet, glared at her with pure hatred. The looks weren't just dismissive now. They were accusing. She had brought this bad luck. Her strange ideas had poisoned the test. She opened her mouth to speak, to say that her screen had shown the danger, that she had tried to warn them, but no words came. The commander's narrative was already hardening into fact. She was the problem. Security arrived. Escort the doctor back to her quarters, the commander said, his voice flat and cold. She is confined till further notice. And get her that data log from right before the pulse. I want to see exactly what she was looking at. As the guards led her away, she saw it. The commander wasn't just covering his mistake. He was scared. Truly scared. Not of the injured men or the broken machine, but of the fact that the object had reacted in a way his hard numbers never predicted. It had fought back, and the only person who might have understood why was being locked away. The door to her small room hissed shut behind her, the lock engaging with a heavy, final sound. The weight of the entire mountain above her felt like it was pressing down. She was alone, blamed, and silenced. But in the absolute quiet, a new clarity arrived. The commander was not just a hard man making tough choices. He was a man who was wrong, and his being wrong had just hurt people. She looked at the blank wall, thinking of the object's final jagged scream on her screen. It wasn't just a weapon. It was alive in a way they couldn't grasp. and the commander was too afraid of looking weak to admit he didn't understand. She had to prove it. Not to save her job, but because the next test might kill everyone in the base. She sat on her bunk, closed her eyes, and did the only thing she could. She replayed every symbol, every pulse, every change in the data from the very beginning. She had to find the truth in the language. She had to find the key. And she had to do it from a locked room, with the whole Blacksite now believing she was a curse. The silence in her room was different now. Before, it had been the silence of being ignored. Now, it was the heavy, watchful silence of a cage. A small camera's red light glowed in the corner by the door, unblinking. They were letting her stew, letting the blame settle over her like dust. Food came on a tray, pushed through a slot. No one spoke to her. The guards outside her door changed shifts with a clank of boots, a murmur of voices she couldn't make out. She was a problem in storage. The commander's story, the failed test, the injured men, the ruined equipment was being written into the official record, and she was the convenient chapter titled Human Error. But anger, she found, was a useful fuel. It burned away the last of her fear. They had locked away the only person who was actually listening, and that was their mistake. She still had her tablet. A basic, hardened device meant only for viewing data feeds and writing reports. It had no connection to the outside world, but it could access the Blacksite's internal server, the one that held all the research logs, the sensor readings from the object, and the personnel files with restricted clearances. Her access level was supposed to be limited. But in the early days, trying to be helpful, she had written a small translation algorithm to help sort the artifact's chaotic data. The commander had dismissed it as more academic clutter, but his engineers had quietly installed it on the main system to clean up their own feeds. And she had built a backdoor into it, not for spying, but to make updates easier. A lazy habit from her old university life. Now it was a lifeline. Working under the thin blanket, she tapped into the system. She wasn't a hacker, but she understood patterns. She began pulling files, not about the object, but about the commander. Service records were easy. Decorations, commendations, a spotless rise through the ranks. Too spotless. It was the digital equivalent of a very clean, very empty room. She dug deeper, into the older archive systems that predated the Blacksite. She searched for incidents, reprimands, anything that showed a flaw, a mistake. She found nothing. It was as if the man had been born a fully formed kernel. This, more than anything, felt wrong. Every person leaves a mess, a trail of small errors. His trail was surgically removed. Then she changed her search. Instead of looking for him, she looked for his signature. Not a written one, but a digital one. In her work with the object, she had identified core patterns, ways of thinking, sequences of logic that repeated. It was like recognizing a person's handwriting. Every coder, every engineer, has one dot. She cross-referenced these with a global database of major, unsolved cyber intrusions that was downloaded into the server for threat analysis. She looked for the ones that had a certain style, a particular elegance in their chaos. Her eyes were tired, the screen blurring, when she found it. A decade-old file, known in intelligence circles as the Janus Protocol. It wasn't a weapons hack or an act of war. It was a perfect, beautiful crime. A series of simultaneous silent raids on the digital transaction hubs of 3 major banks. No money was stolen. Instead, the protocols that verified every transaction, the very idea of digital truth, were subtly rewritten, just for 7 minutes. In that time, money lost its meaning. It was a demonstration of pure, unsettling power. The hacker was never caught. The digital fingerprints were a ghost story, but one fragment of code, a tiny subroutine used to bypass a secondary firewall, had been recovered. It was unique, ingenious. It worked like a key that gently persuaded a lock to open itself. And it was a perfect, bite-for-bite match for a routine she now found buried in the commander's early sealed military training file. An exercise from a cyber warfare course he had taken as a young officer. An exercise he had been told he failed for using overly complex theatrical solutions. Her blood went cold. She looked from the Janus code on one screen to the commander's exercise on the other. They were twins. He was Janus. The room seemed to shrink. The hum of the air vents grew louder. She understood now. The commander wasn't just a soldier who didn't like her methods. He was a man who lived a secret. His whole career was a cover, built over a brilliant, criminal mind that loved to break systems just to prove it could. And then, the final terrible connection clicked. She pulled up the raw data from the object, focusing on the deep structural patterns she had always felt but couldn't name. She laid the Janus protocol's logic map next to it. They weren't the same, but they were cousins. They shared a philosophy, a way of thinking that saw rules, structures, even physics, not as laws, but as suggestions to be cleverly ignored. The object's language was this philosophy written in light. The commander's greatest crime was written in code, and he had recognized it. That's why he was so desperate to weaponize it. That's why he mocked her search for meaning. He didn't want to understand the object's story. He already spoke its base language, the language of control, of breaking, of superiority. He wanted its power to perfect his own art. He wasn't defending the world from a threat. He wanted to become the threat, with a tool no one could ever hope to understand. She sat back, her hands trembling. The weight of the knowledge was crushing. She had proof of a crime, but more importantly, she had proof of a motive. If she simply accused him of being Janus, he would deny it, and the system he had fooled for a decade would believe him. She was the disgraced linguist with an overactive imagination. She needed to make him reveal himself. She needed to use his own secrets and the object's true nature as a trap. He saw patterns as tools for domination. She had to learn to use them as a mirror, to show everyone what he really was. The red eye of the camera watched her. She was no longer just trying to translate an alien artifact. She was trying to translate a man's hidden heart, and the truth was uglier than anything she could have imagined. The guard's boots clanked outside her door again. She closed her eyes, not in fear, but to think. The next move had to be perfect. She had one chance. The Blacksite didn't sleep, but it held its breath. After the failed test, a grim quiet had fallen over the labs. The injured engineers had been flown out. The broken equipment was cleared away, leaving a scorched mark on the floor like a bad memory. The commander was rarely seen, but his presence was a cold draft everyone felt. The word was he was working on something new, something bigger. A final solution. The linguist was let out of her room after 3 days. No apology, no explanation. She was simply returned to her station. But everything was different. A security officer stood nearby, not even pretending to do anything else but watch her. Her access on the computer was now limited to a single monitored feed from the object, which was once again glowing with its soft, slow pulse. They had put it back in its box, but she could feel its song was different now. It was a low, wary hum. It remembered the pain. She knew she was being baited. The commander wanted her to make a mistake, to act out, to give him a reason to make her disappear for good. So she played her part. She kept her head down. She typed her reports in dry, technical language. She was the picture of a broken expert, suitably chastised. Meanwhile, she worked inside her own mind. She couldn't access the secret files anymore. They had locked her back door, but she didn't need to. She had memorized the patterns, the Janus code, the commander's old exercise, the object's deep logic. She spent her nights in her bunk, eyes closed, fitting the pieces together. The trap had to be public. It had to use his own tools against him. And it had to be about the object. That was the only thing he cared about. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. A visitor arrived. A man in a crisp civilian suit, flanked by serious aides who carried themselves like soldiers. He was from the Oversight Committee, the people who signed the checks and asked for results. The commander, for the first time in weeks, looked tense. This was his audience. His moment to prove his project was worth the money and the buried accidents. A full demonstration was ordered. Not a violent test this time, but a display of controlled resonance. The commander would show how they could now make the object emit a stable energy field. The first step, he claimed, towards an impenetrable shield. The linguist was ordered to attend, to provide linguistic context. It was a power move. He was putting his pet academic on a leash in front of his bosses. The main lab was brightly lit, buzzing with a forced, professional energy. The visitor stood on the command platform with the commander, looking down at the object. The linguist was placed at a small desk to the side, her monitor visible only to her and the guard behind her. "Initiate Phase 1, the commander said, his voice booming with confidence. A low thrum filled the room. The object began to glow brighter, and a shimmering, honey-colored field of light expanded from it, like a bubble. The visitor leaned forward, impressed. "Fascinating," he said. The commander allowed himself a small smile. "This is just the baseline. The artifact's potential is tied to command logic. My theory is that a stronger, more complex input will generate a proportionally stronger field." He turned to his technicians. "Prepare to engage my direct command protocol." This was it. This was his new play. He had written his own code, based on his understanding of the object's logic, the logic that mirrored his own Janus protocol. He was going to speak to it in its own language, his language, and make it dance. The linguist's fingers flew over her keyboard, not typing, but activating a sequence she had written and hidden deep within the analysis software days ago. It was a simple program. It waited for a very specific, unique signal, the digital fingerprint of the Janus code. The moment the commander's personal protocol was uploaded to the mainframe to interface with the object, her program would wake up. "Protocol uploading now," a technician called out. On her screen, a small, innocuous window popped up in the corner. It read, "Asterisk pattern match found. Executing echo sequence. Asterisk no." One saw it but her. The commander's face was a mask of focused triumph. He was about to become the master of the greatest tool ever discovered. The linguist took a deep breath and stood up. Her chair scraped loudly on the floor. Every head turned to her. The guard stepped forward, but the visitor held up a hand, curious. "Sir," she said, her voice clear and loud, cutting through the hum. "Before you proceed, you should understand what you're really connecting to." The commander's smile vanished. "Sit down, Doctor. You are out of order." "I'm afraid the data is out of order, Commander," she said, her eyes not on him, but on the visitor. "You see, the artifact doesn't respond to strength. It responds to identity. It recognizes its own. What are you babbling about?" The commander snapped, but a flicker of unease was in his eyes. On the main viewing screen, meant to show energy readings, her hidden program worked. It split the screen. On one side, it displayed the complex, elegant code of the commander's direct command protocol as it flowed into the system. On the other side, it began to play, line by line, the recovered code from the Janus protocol bank hack. The room froze. Technicians stared. The visitor squinted, leaning closer. "For those who aren't specialists in code," the linguist said, her voice calm, like a teacher, "you are looking at two digital signatures. The one on the right is from an unsolved, major criminal cyber intrusion known as Janus. The one on the left is Commander's personal key, written for this project. She paused, letting the lines of code scroll, matching up, mirroring each other. They are identical. He isn't just commanding the artifact. He is speaking to it in a language he invented for crime. A language of perfect secret control. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the low hum of the object. The commander's face went from pale to a deep, furious red. This is a lie. A fabrication. She's hacked the display. She's trying to sabotage this project because she was disciplined. The visitor looked from the screen to the commander, his expression unreadable. Explain the match, Commander. It's a coincidence. Or she wrote it herself. She has access. But I don't have access to sealed military training records from 12 years ago, the linguist said quietly. She tapped a final key. A third box appeared on the screen, showing the young commander's cyber warfare exercise. The same code fragment, with his student ID number attached, where a young officer was reprimanded for this theatrical solution. The same one used by Janus years later. The trap was sprung. The evidence was there, in his own handwriting, from his own past. The commander looked at the faces around him, the confused technicians, the stone-faced visitor, his own sergeant whose loyalty was now wavering. He saw his perfect cover crumbling. You don't understand. He shouted, his composure shattering. His voice was raw, stripped of its authority. That was just theory. This, he pointed a shaking finger at the object, its field still shimmering. This is the ultimate system. It doesn't care about your morals, your rules. It only respects power. Pure, unstoppable logic. I can master it. I am the only one who can. He was no longer defending himself. He was confessing. He was telling them exactly who he was and what he wanted. The visitor's face hardened. He gave a small nod to his aides. The commander saw it. He looked from them to the object, a wild, desperate light in his eyes. He had nothing left to lose. You want to see its real power? He yelled, I'll show you. Bypass all safeties. Maximum input. Now. He was going to break it or break the world trying, just to prove he was right. The linguist's heart slammed against her ribs. She had revealed the secret, but she might have just unleashed the disaster. The commander's shout wasn't an order anymore. It was a scream of pure rage. It cut through the stunned silence of the lab. For a second, nobody moved. The technicians at the controls looked from the commander's wild face to the stone-faced visitor, their hands frozen over the consoles. Do it! The commander roared, lunging towards the main panel himself. That broke the spell. Two of the visitor's aides moved, fast and smooth, intercepting him. They grabbed his arms. He fought, not like a soldier, but like a cornered animal, thrashing against their grip. You fools! You're throwing away the key to everything. It answers to me, only me. The visitor ignored him, his eyes fixed on the linguist. Can you stop it? He asked, his voice low and urgent. Can you shut it down? She looked at the screen. The commander's corrupted protocol was still feeding into the object. The honey-colored energy field was pulsing now, throbbing with a deep, unhealthy red at its core. It was like watching a heart starting to beat erratically. The numbers on the side were climbing, fast. The air began to feel thick, heavy to breathe. A low, grinding noise vibrated up from the floor, making their teeth ache. The protocol is locked in, she said, her mind racing. I can't break his command from here. It's sealed with his signature, the Janus code. It was a perfect lock. But every lock has a weakness. You don't break it. You convince it to open. The grinding noise grew louder. A fine dust sifted from the ceiling. The sergeant, who had been standing loyal and silent, now looked at the straining object with real fear. The containment field is destabilizing. He yelled over the noise, his soldier's instinct overriding his old loyalty. The commander, still held tight, laughed a broken laugh. "See? It needs my voice to calm it. Let me go. I can control it." The linguist tuned him out. His voice was the problem. His logic was the poison. She stared at the swirling, angry patterns on her screen, the object's suffering song. The commander had tried to speak to it as a master to a slave. He had shouted his own brilliant, toxic language of control into its heart. And it was screaming back. What do you do when someone is screaming? You don't scream louder. You listen. And then you speak softly to the part that is hurt. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, not trying to hack, not trying to command. She was typing a translation. She took the raw, chaotic data of the object's distress, the jagged red lines, the stuttering pulses, and she began to weave it into a new sequence. Not a counter-command, a response. An acknowledgement dot. It was the deepest translation she had ever attempted. She wasn't just converting symbols. She was trying to say, "Asterisk, I hear you. I see your pain. The bad voice is being taken away." Asterisk, the energy field flickered, a violent strobe light that made people cover their eyes. A wrenching sound of tearing metal came from the pedestal. The visitor grabbed the console for support. "We have to evacuate." "Wait," the linguist whispered, not to him, but to the screen. She poured every ounce of her focus into the final lines. It wasn't code. It was a story. A very short, simple story. Asterisk, the loud one is gone. The silence is returning. Be at peace. Asterisk, she sent it. A gentle, quiet data packet directly into the feed, right beside the commander's raging, shouting protocol. For 3 terrible seconds, nothing happened. The red core of the field swelled, ready to burst. Then it began to change. The angry red softened, bled away into a deep, sad purple, and then into the original honey gold. The grinding noise faded to a hum, and then to silence. The numbers on the screen plummeted. The violent throbbing steadied into the familiar, slow, soft pulse. The field gently shrank back, touching the surface of the object like a blanket, and then disappeared. The object sat on its pedestal, glowing calmly as if nothing had happened. The heavy pressure vanished from the air. The lab was left in a ringing, exhausted quiet. The only sound was the commander's ragged breathing. He had stopped struggling. He was just staring at the object, his face empty, his eyes wide with a kind of horrible understanding. He had shouted his best, his most powerful, his most secret self-edit, and it had chosen the quiet woman's whisper instead. The visitor slowly straightened his suit. He looked at the commander with something close to pity. Take him to the holding wing. Full isolation. His aides nodded, leading the broken man away. The commander went without a word, his gaze still locked on the artifact until the door shut behind him. The visitor then walked over to the linguist's desk. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands in her lap, trembling slightly from the adrenaline. "What did you just do?" he asked. His voice wasn't demanding. It was a real question. She looked up, her face tired. He was trying to give it orders. "You can't order something that doesn't share your soul." I just explained the situation. I told it the fight was over. The visitor considered this. He looked around the scarred lab, at the scared faces of the staff, at the serene object. "And what is it? A weapon?" The linguist shook her head slowly. She finally understood. The core message, buried under layers of beautiful, complex logic, was simple. No, it's a memory. A record of a place where thought and feeling were the same thing. Where they built with ideas, not with tools. The commander's code, his whole mind, was like a loud, angry noise to it. It was trying to defend itself, to protect the memory. So it's harmless? Not harmless, she said, but not a weapon. It's fragile. If you try to force it to be something it's not, it will break. And if it breaks, it might take a lot with it. Not with a bomb, but by unmaking the logic around it, like the Janus Protocol did to those banks, but to reality itself. The visitor was silent for a long time. We need to contain this project, properly, safely. He looked at her. I need a full report, not on his secrets, on the artifact, on what it needs, on how to keep it and us safe. He wasn't asking the loudest voice in the room. He was asking the one who had learned how to listen. In the days that followed, the Blacksite changed. The lockdown remained, but the fear in the air began to clear. The linguist was given a new room, not a cell. Her security guard was replaced by a quiet assistant. The sergeant, now leading base security in the interim, saluted her stiffly in the hall, his eyes no longer holding mockery, but a wary respect. She spent her days in the lab, but it was different now. The goal wasn't to take any more. It was to understand. She would sit for hours, the symbols flowing on her screen, and she would write her gentle, careful translations. Stories sent to a story. The object's glow remained steady, peaceful dot sometimes. Late at night, she would think about the commander, alone in his cell. He had seen the ultimate system and had tried to own it. He had been so sure that power was the only language that mattered. And in the end, the only thing his power had achieved was his own silence. She turned back to her screen, to the soft, pulsing light. There were still so many stories to listen to. And for the first time since she had arrived in the cold, hard dark, she felt no need to rush.